Welcome to Podcast Sound Advice, the place for up-to-date podcast tactics and trends. You'll find actionable strategies to help you grow your audience, expand your influence, and monetize your content. Join Phyllis and Kelvin for Podcast Sound Advice starting now.
Thanks for joining us today. Kelvin and I are talking to one of my favorite people and one of the most interesting business owners / social media guru / influencer person, Jen Lehner. She's here with us. So welcome, Jen.
Hey, Phyllis. It's so great to be here.
Well, for people who don't know, Jen is the host of the Front Row podcast for entrepreneurs. She started this back in October of 2017, tens of thousands of downloads. She's done some incredible interviews and some actually great solo episodes as well. I like that she does a mix of both. So Jen, for people who don't know, you have a great story about how you started your podcast. So for people who don't know, let's just start there. Why don't you tell people what was your motivation and inspiration for doing that?
Well, a podcast was on my list of things I wanted to tackle eventually. I wanted to add that into my business. But like a lot of people, it was just sort of on the list of things to do. I'll get to it one day. And I was out for a walk one beautiful Sunday with my dog. I was listening to a podcast. I was listening to James Altucher's podcast, and Gary Vaynerchuk was his guest. And somewhere in the middle of the interview, like Gary Vaynerchuk just turned this, just did this abrupt subject change. And he's like, hey, I have a great idea. Let's put this challenge out to your listeners. Okay, listeners, anybody who starts a podcast right now, because of this episode, because you heard us talking about it, and you tag us with the hashtag Gary and James, I did it. Hashtag Gary and James, I did it. And you have at least 3 episodes published. I'm going to come on your podcast. And James Altucher said, yeah, me too. I will too. And I was like, oh man. So like, I had no choice. I had to turn around and go home. And I had no intentions of working that Sunday, but I was like, how could I not? I have to. This is like screaming at me. I have to do it. So I took the dog home. I handed the dog to my husband. I said, look, you've got the kids, you've got the dog. I'm leaving. And you're not going to see me for a little while because I got to create this podcast. So I went off to my office and I pretty much locked myself in there until I had a podcast. So I had 3 episodes. They weren't very good, but I did it, and that's how it started.
Yeah, which is awesome. I just love that, and that is one of the things that I think. Well, Jen, I think that you're known for, which is recognizing trends and taking fast action. I don't think it's any accident that that works for you. Now, you did get James and Gary both on the podcast, right?
I did.
Yep. So they followed through, which is awesome.
It wasn't easy. I had to really kind of really take it down, but I got them.
Okay, good. Yeah. Well, and I love it. For people who haven't heard Jen's podcast yet, because you definitely need to listen. How did you get Gary? She's got Gary V. Just a little bit of a snippet that we use in her intro. So how did you get that?
Oh, well, so he intros my podcast. It says, what does it say? He says something like, this is Gary Vaynerchuk, and you're listening to the Front Row Entrepreneur Podcast with our girl, Jen. And so I don't know. I just thought, how am I going to capitalize on having this guy on this podcast? It led to beautiful things, because when he came on the show, he had promised on his podcast with James, the only promise he made was 5 minutes. I'll come on your show for 5 minutes. But he knew the value in that, right? That anybody starting their podcast being able to promote the fact that it gives you instant credibility, more or less, right? And you're going to get listeners on your podcast. So he knew the value of that. But fortunately for me, he stayed on for about 45 minutes because the conversation was going really well. And while it was happening, I was thinking like, I got to make the most of this. So I just said, like, what's the worst he could say? Like, he could say no. And I didn't care, So I just said, hey, will you do me a favor before you go? Will you say these words? And he's like, yeah, sure. And he did. And then I had that video. Then I had that audio to use. And then he asked me, his partner or whatever, assistant, reached out to me and about a week later and said, hey, can we feature the episode on the Daily V? And I was like, yeah. Sure. So they played the
Wow.
whole episode on his channel. So it was pretty awesome. So
That's incredible.
the moral of that story is that don't think that I'm the only one, by the way, who I don't think I'm the only one who took advantage of that, but I'm the only one that really chased it down like a pit bull. I mean, I don't know, do pit bulls chase things down? I don't know. I tweeted and tweeted and tweeted and DM'd, and I was unrelenting and tenacious.
You were tenacious, yes.
Yeah.
And well,
persistent.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think there's such a good lesson. I mean, I think part of that is just who you are, but I think it's also a good reminder to us, these opportunities are available. Like a lot of people, I can guarantee you, listen to that episode just like you did and thought, oh, this is a really good idea. I'm going to do this. And maybe even a few other people sort of started or whatever, right? But following through is everything.
Yeah,
obviously. So yeah. Which is incredible. And I don't think I knew, I didn't know that they ran it on the Gary V show. So that's incredible. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was really exciting.
So because you kind of figured all this out yourself and that sort of thing, like what one or two things would you pass along to someone who's going, well, this all sounds great, but I'm not Jen. So what one or two things would you recommend that people either learn or research or sort of figure out if they're thinking about starting a podcast?
Oh, that's easy. I would say call Sound Advice because if I would have known there was a you out there, I would have it would have saved me a whole hell of a lot of trouble, and I would have done it. It would have been so much better. But in all honesty, we could all go. You can Google how to start a podcast, and you can figure it out. And it doesn't take a PhD, right? But there's so many things that, if you really want to give yourself the best chance of getting a really good out of the gate, fighting chance with so many podcasts out there, then better leave that to the professionals. And now the way that it's set up, it's so much better. So I just literally step into my studio, I press record, and then I upload it, and you take care of the rest. And God, that has made such a difference because I don't want to spend my time editing out the ams and the ums and the ahs, and I don't want to deal with the show notes.
Not that you do that. Not
at all, Kelvin. Thank you. And you would know best, that's for sure. But I did it again. I'm the worst ummer and ahher. So it's and there's so much just for the title, which by the way, I got sued almost because of my title. Should we talk about that?
Yeah, explain, because I knew about when that happened, sort of after the fact. You kind of came up, you talked about it, I think, after the fact. So yeah, tell us what happened.
Yeah, so if I would have started with a professional outfit like you guys, then you would have helped me research the name, and we would have known that the word entrepreneur is trademarked, if you can believe it. But it's trademarked by Entrepreneur Magazine. And the name of my podcast was The Front Row Entrepreneur. And the way that we found out, the way that I got in trouble was I went to get a registered trademark on the name so that I could protect it. And lo and behold, I get a letter from that alerted Entrepreneur Magazine, and they sent me a letter and said, you're in infringement, trademark infringement, and you can't use the word entrepreneur. And of course, I was like, oh, well, good luck.
Which I find to be ridiculous, to be honest.
Of course it's ridiculous.
You can't use the word entrepreneur. That's what we all are.
Right. I mean, it'd be like saying you couldn't use the word plumber or electrician. I mean, it's like,
right.
And so it's so dumb. And so that's everybody's immediate response. Well, that's an empty threat because of course you can use it. But actually, upon further research, they did this back in the 70s, and it was really shady how it all went down. And there's articles that have been written on it, and podcasts much larger than my own, like Entrepreneur on Fire with John Lee Dumas. They also went after him. He actually subsequently ended up changing the name of the podcast, even though you think it's still that. It's actually EO Fire is technically what he's called.
Right.
And then I had to change mine, so it says the Front Row Entrepreneur. It's the Front Row Podcast for Entrepreneurs. So dumb. But what happened was they kept harassing me. And the thing is like they're represented by this huge law firm, Latham and Watkins. You could fight them if you want and potentially win. but you're going to go broke fighting them, and they'll make sure that you do. And that's why they're able to bully all these entrepreneurs. And I have been contacted by literally dozens of entrepreneurs who have been harassed by them because they heard my story. And the way they heard my story was because I reached out to Seth Godin. And here's a little known fact that Seth Godin will reply to your emails, okay, personally. So if you read one of his blog posts and you write him an email and be like, oh, that's really good, I agree, and what do you think about this? He'll reply back. It's usually 1 or 2 words, but he usually does reply back. So over the years, I have communicated with him in that way. I'm sure he has no memory of me. And here and there, I have asked him, hey, would you come on
how he could forget.
Oh, Kelvin. But every once in a while I would say like, hey, would you come on my flash briefing, or would you come on my podcast? I know I've asked him a few times, and he just will say, no, I'm sorry, no. I mean, he doesn't give you an excuse because that's very much his style. He doesn't believe he needs to give you, and it's something to learn from. You don't have to explain your no. You could just say no.
Yeah, you can say, no, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. He's very polite. But I wrote him and I said, did you know that the word entrepreneur is trademarked by Entrepreneur Magazine? And I told him the story, and he wrote back and said, that's ridiculous, yada, yada, yada. And I said, hey, would you come on my podcast? And he goes, sure. And so he came on my podcast. I couldn't believe it. So he came on my podcast. He was wonderful. And then shortly after that, now I feel like, hey, we're best friends, right? Because he came on my podcast, and I get another email. Like I had agreed to the terms and said, okay, I'll change the name of my podcast. And they said, well, you also have to change all your blog posts and every single episode. And so this is going to take a lot of time. And I was like, yeah, give me a little time, but I will. And I pretty much had as much done as I would catch things, I would change it. But it's a huge job, as you can imagine. I get an email from them, and they said, they had screenshot one of my blog posts that had the word entrepreneur in it. It was literally the title of the blog post, like how you can do so it's such and so as an entrepreneur. And they sent me a very threatening email. So I sent that. I forwarded it to Seth Godin and said, just so you know, like they're still at it. And he wrote back and said, do you want me to write about it? And I said, yes, I do. That would be great. And he wrote this whole blog about it. It went completely viral, and I never heard another word from Entrepreneur Magazine because people were tweeting them and unsubscribing from them and shaming them for picking on the little guy. Like the very person
they're supposed to represent.
Right. Their mission statement is something like yada, 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 support and help small businesses and entrepreneurs. Baloney. No, that's not what they do. So anyway, that was a cool podcasting moment for sure.
Oh, that is incredible. I knew about some of that. I certainly didn't know about all of it. The episode with Seth is really, really good. He was really great. He shared a lot of really good information. You guys sounded like you're best friends. It was about super. I loved it. By the way, I'm going to get to that back to that in a minute. But one thing that you mentioned in there that I want to touch on, you do other types of audio content, and you mentioned flash briefing, and that's one of the other things you do. So just give us for people who don't know what that is, give us a short little explanation of that. And I'd be curious how you approach your flash briefing content versus your podcast content.
Oh, yeah, that's easy. So the flash briefing is delivered via a smart device, Amazon Lexi, we're going to call her. We're not going to say her full name so we don't wake her up.
Thank you. Yep.
But so it's just, it's what I do is every morning, Monday through Friday, I just record like a 2 to 3 minute audio clip of the latest news that I think is important for entrepreneurs to know in the world of like social media and online business and so forth. And that's news. So it's, here today, gone tomorrow. It's not evergreen. That's it. You get it when you get it. And then my podcast goes way deeper. So those are longer, and there's, it's more evergreen content, and it might be an interview or.
Thanks to your podcast, ours won't wake up because they're called different things, which was in your podcast.
Because of your podcast.
Oh yeah, because you can call it. You can give it
Computer, Echo, Amazon, Alexa. Oops! Now I just woke them all up.
Oh, stop it.
You did. They're all awake now. I heard it.
Yeah. But we learned that from one of your interviews that you did with, her name escapes me right this second. I get her emails.
Catherine from Voice Brew.
Yes, Voice Brew. Yeah. So we learned that little trick, which is awesome. So that's great to know. I agree. Like your podcast stuff is very evergreen. So what do you like? I'm curious. I don't know the answer to this. I'm just kind of curious. I know that you enjoy doing the flash briefings. So talk a little bit about, I know that you have a system for doing that, but do you like the fact that you can just be really short, concise, and kind of just put it out there and then move on? I mean, like, what's the vibe with that? And because there's a lot of work that goes into doing it. And part of me is like, oh my gosh, I don't know that, like, knowing it's here today, gone tomorrow, I think might upset me. I'm not sure I like that sort of sense. What do you think?
Okay, so the key with the flash briefing is that you have to be consistent with it. And the only reason I chose the news was because I cannot write. I'm not going to be able to come up with all these ideas. Like it's easy. Like, and also I don't do it. My assistant who's in the Philippines, while I'm sleeping, she's getting the news fresh off the press and she's scouring all of our favorite resources to find out like what's new. And then, and so I don't have to do any work. It's like I walk into the studio, I again press record, and I do it every single day. But the benefits, it's not evergreen, but I drive people back at the end of every one of these. I drive them. Always give a call to action. So it's great for SEO because just like with our podcast, I'll say any resources mentioned in this episode or replay of this episode is available on the show notes page at jenlehner.com/flash. They go there and it's indexed like a blog or a podcast page. So every single day has its own listing. And so therefore I'm getting really good SEO and traffic.
Right.
There's that benefit. And I can be, I do invite people to join my free online community. Sometimes that's a call to action. When I publish my weekly podcast episode, I promote that on the flash briefing. So it serves its purpose it's very beneficial for a million other reasons. So I don't need it to be evergreen. And I like it. It's easier for me than the podcast because as you know, I really struggle. Like, we got to talk after this interview because I don't know what I'm publishing on Tuesday. And I have a hard time with the podcast content because I like my podcast to be like mini lessons. I want them to be like actionable. I don't want to just get on there and yammer on. And I don't want to interview people just for the sake of interviewing. Yes, some do. But I mean, and that's been me more than once or twice, I'm sure, even though I don't want it to be. But
No.
And interviewing people, I mean, that's definitely an art form that I'm years away from perfecting. I mean, I as you know, I'll reach out to Phyllis and say, Phyllis, I sounded like such an idiot. You have to make me not sound like an idiot. Please edit this so I don't sound so stupid. Because, it really is an art form to do a good interview. You have to be able to listen and go with it. But yet the inclination is to think, all right, what am I going to ask next? Or how am I going to get this question in? And where's a good place to insert that? And, and then what about when you just draw a blank? Every day in my real life, I'm always like, duh. Like, I mean, it could be in the middle of a conversation and be like, what am I even talking about? It happens all the time. So it's a problem.
Guilty.
Of podcasts, so I struggle. It's hard. Podcast is much harder for me, but they're such an amazing, they're just, I'm so glad you pushed me. You gave me a little push because, I made the declaration in January that I was going to do 52 episodes this year. And you really have held my feet to the fire on that. So like, honestly, without your push, I'd already be probably I know that I would have much less episodes published.
Well, a lot of people never get past 7.
Yeah, that's, we talk about that stat a lot because that's the truth. A lot of people never get past 7 episodes. Did you know that? Like, it's a crazy, weird number. Like, I want to say like 50% of podcasts, It's maybe not quite 50%, but it's somewhere in the 40s. Like, they start and they never get past 7 episodes. And starting actually in 2019, Apple Podcasts started going through and removing stuff like that hadn't, again, were like 7 episodes or less and maybe hadn't published in like 18 months. They just started taking them off the platform. So yeah, to longevity counts, you keep showing up, which is great. You're really your own worst critic. You tell me like, oh, I sound terrible, and you don't. Like a lot, you're interviews are always really interesting. Plus, you have really interesting people on. So yeah, just give you a little.
There's very few people that podcast that I know of that don't say I sound horrible, including me.
I mean, yeah, I know that. I know we're all our own worst critics, and we don't like the sound of our voice, but it's just, when you see someone doing it really well, like I love people. There's a tactic. I don't know if it's a tactic. It's just a skill where you're interviewing someone and then you rephrase what they say back to them. Like Michael Stelzer does that a lot. He'll say like, so what I hear you're saying is this, and it gives you, the listener, a chance to absorb, but I tend to just rush out of the gate. Like, oh, I can't wait to talk about this. And then we're on to the next thing. We're on to the next thing. And so
it also lets the person know you're listening.
That's true. It does. Let me tell you, the hardest ones to me are book interviews. So I've had a lot of people lately who have been authors, and they come on the show and they're promoting their book, obviously, and I want to help them do that. And I want to talk about the book. And I definitely always try to read the book before they go on. There's been a couple times where I've read the first 4 chapters and scanned the rest and asked their publicist for some talking points. I mean, I've done it, but it's just really hard because I want to ask about, 42 things that I have highlighted, but it's hard to say it. Like, okay, let me tell you, talk show hosts are great at this. For a fact that they've been given talking points of funny stories and anecdotes. And then they'll say like, so what's it like, homeschooling your kids during a pandemic, right? And you know that they got that scoop before they went in, but somehow they effortlessly just sort of, it feels so natural in the conversation. Right. That's what I'm really working towards. So,
yeah. Well, I agree with you. Interviewing is definitely a skill. It's something I work on as well. I don't think it comes natural to me. And I think I can have good conversations, but that's different than interviewing, right?
That's why I'm only here for color commentary.
Yeah. So, all right, I'm going to wrap up because we could talk like all day about stuff. So I'm going to wrap up though, so that people can find you. Well, before we do that, we're going to be sharing with them, obviously, your website, how to reach your podcast. But I would like for them to know 1 or 2 of your favorite episodes that you would like to point them to. And we will link to those specifically as well, so that they can just easily kind of find stuff that you really like. So which ones would you like us to direct them to?
Well, I think that I really like my interview with a woman named Heather Tesco. And I'm going to have to give you the link later because I don't have it in front of me. It was one of my early episodes, actually, but her story is so cool. She has a really unique niche, and she talks about how she monetized that and without a huge following. And she's just super smart, very interesting. I really enjoyed that one. And then I think in terms of being something super helpful and actionable, if you are thinking of starting a membership site, I know people left and right are everybody wants that recurring revenue. So I did an episode about like something, I don't know the exact title, the top 10 things I wish I had known before I started my membership site. I think that's a good one that's instructional. And then I think just for fun, maybe the Gary V or the Seth Godin one is good. I don't know if it's good, but I had fun doing it.
No, they're good. And I'm glad. I believe I remember the Heather episode. I think I've listened to that. But so we will put that in the show notes, and we'll make sure and make it really easy for people to find those episodes. But of course, everybody's just going to subscribe and listen to all of them. So tell us, other than finding you on the podcast, what are the couple of social media places where people can easily find and connect with you?
I think I would love to invite your listeners to join me in my free online classroom, The Front Row, and you could just get there by going to frontrowclassroom.com.
Perfect. That's great. Yeah, I would encourage people to do that. I'm part of that group as well. So thank you, Jen. I appreciate your time, and we will make sure that everybody can kind of get in the loop and check out all your info.
Thank you so much. This was really fun, Phyllis and Kelvin. You guys take care.
That's our wrap for this episode. We hope you found today's sound advice helpful. Let us know what you think by leaving us a review. You can get more resources at podcastsoundadvice.com. Until next time.
This podcast is part of the Sound Advice FM network. Sound Advice FM. Women's voices amplified.